Okay, let's unpack this. It's quite a statistic, really. Over 28 million adults in the U.S. living with mental illness, and, well, a huge number just aren't getting treatment.
Yeah, it's staggering.
And a massive roadblock, just getting that formal diagnosis in the first place. Not enough providers, the cost of health care. It's a real struggle.
And the interesting thing is the process itself, a gold standard. It involves these really thorough, structured interviews, often based on the DSM-5.
Right.
Think of it like a very detailed fact-finding mission, trying to get the most accurate picture possible.
Exactly, but that thoroughness, well, it creates a bottleneck, doesn't it?
It does.
These interviews, they take a lot of time, need very specific skills. And, think about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It's often there, but it just doesn't always get picked up.
Mm-hmm.
We hear that figure in safety net hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
Over 85% of people have experienced trauma. That's huge.
It really is.
But the kind of comprehensive assessments needed, they're just not happening on that scale.
Which leads to this big question, right? How do we bridge that gap, the clear need versus the very real limits of our system?
Yeah.
And that's where some pretty cutting-edge research comes in.
Which brings us right to the heart of our deep dive today. There's this research paper, it's titled Trust, an LLM-based dialogue system for trauma understanding and structured assessments.
Okay.
Now, LLM, for those not maybe deep in the tech stuff,
Right.
that's large language model.
Yeah.
The powerful AI behind some advanced chatbots.
Like GPT or Claude.
Exactly. And this research is looking at whether these LMs could actually conduct those complex diagnostic interviews, specifically for PTSD.
And if you think about the bigger picture here, the potential impact, it's pretty immense.
For sure.
I mean, imagine a future where getting that first formal diagnosis is just much more accessible, maybe faster, maybe cheaper.
That's the possibility, isn't it? The exciting part.
Yeah.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to really get to grips with the potential and, let's be honest, the challenges too of using AI, these LLMs, for formal mental health diagnostic interviews.
Yeah.
We're going to dig into this trust system and see what the research found.
Okay, so let's circle back to that problem we started with. It's not just the sheer number of people, right? It's the hurdles they face getting care.
Mm-hmm.
And that formal diagnosis, it's often like the key, the key that unlocks the right kind of care.
And it's way more involved than just someone saying, oh, I feel down. For lots of conditions, especially something complex like PTSD, you need that really thorough, structured assessment.
Totally vital.
But like we said, that takes time, specialized expertise, stuff that's just, well, in short supply.
And the paper really uses PTSD as a sort of prime example. Those figures they mention about trauma exposure, that 85% plus number, it's pretty stark.
Yeah.
But the resources for doing those comprehensive assessments, they're just not keeping pace. So people who could really benefit from help might not even get identified correctly.
Okay, so this is where trust enters the picture.
Yeah.
Tell us about this system. What's it actually designed to do?
Right. So Trust Trauma Understanding and Structured Assessments, it's an LLM-powered dialogue system. The main goal is basically to replicate how a human clinician conducts a formal diagnostic interview for PTSD.
Oh.
Specifically, it's built to follow the structure and questions from the clinician-administered PTSD scale for DSM-5. The CAPS-5.
Ah, the key PS5.
Yeah, think of the CAPS-5 as like a really precise checklist clinicians use and make sure they cover all the bases for a PTSD diagnosis consistently.
So it's not just like an AI having a general chat.
Yeah.
It's trying to mimic a very formal, rigorous clinical thing.
Exactly.
How does it manage that? What's under the hood?
Well, that's where the design comes in. It has these two main parts, these modules. A conversation module and an assessment module.
Okay.
The conversation module, you can kind of think of it as managing the chat, the back and forth, deciding what to ask, how to respond like a clinician would.
And the assessment module.
That one's focused on taking the information that's been gathered and figuring out if it meets the actual diagnostic criteria for PTSD.
Gotcha. And the paper mentioned variable metadata. What's that about?
Ah, yeah, that's actually quite important. Think of it like this. The system has this internal list of PTSD symptoms, right? The metadata tells it, okay, this is the specific symptom you need to ask about now. It ensures it covers everything systematically. It's like its internal roadmap for the interview.
Okay, so it's got this built-in guide. What makes trust innovative, though? What are the key things the researchers did differently here?
Well, there are a few really interesting innovations. first off, they developed a specific set of what they call dialogue acts, or DAs.
Dialogue acts.
Yeah, it's basically a set of 8 tags they designed to categorize the different things a clinician might say in an interview.
Like what?
Things like just acknowledging something, like saying okay or uh-huh, or asking for specific information, or offering empathy or validation.
So it's kind of like a coding system, but specifically for these clinical chats. Why is that a big deal?
Exactly. And what's really key is that this schema, these 8, tags things like greetings, giving instructions, acknowledging, empathy, validation, info seeking, clarification questions, giving clarifications. They aren't just for PTSD. They design them to be general enough to potentially apply to interviews for other mental health conditions too. This gives the system much better controllability, helps keep the AI on track, asking the right kinds of questions in a structured way.
That makes sense. Provides a core structure. What else was innovative?
Another really big thing is that Trust is designed to conduct these hour-long formal diagnostic interviews.
An hour. Wow.
Yeah, this isn't just about a quick screening. They're aiming to replicate the real depth of clinical practice for diagnosing PTSD. That's a big step up from a lot of AI mental health tools out there that focus on shorter chats.
Definitely. An hour-long AI interview.
Yeah.
That's ambitious. And the third innovation, something about testing it.
Yes, exactly. They realized that testing this properly with humans playing patients, well, it would take forever and cost a fortune.
Sure.
So they came up with a pretty ingenious workaround. Patient simulation using actual transcripts from real clinician-patient interviews.
Whoa. Okay, so instead of actors, they use real interview data to generate patient responses.
Precisely. The idea was to test the system in a way that felt clinically real across different kinds of patient experiences without needing clinicians involved in every single test run. It's about making the evaluation more authentic and scalable.
Okay, so we have Trust, its internal map, the dialogue acts for structure, and this clever way to test it. Can you walk us through, maybe in simple terms, how it actually works during an interview?
Sure. Think of it like a team working together. First, you've got the database module. That's like the system's memory.
It's knowledge base.
Kind of. It stores all the key info for each PTSD criterion, the questions to ask, what kinds of answers fit, the scoring rules. It also keeps track of the conversation history and the scores assigned so far.
So it's constantly checking its notes, basically.
Exactly. Then you have the framework module that's got those 2 submodules, conversation and assessment.
Right.
When Trust needs to check a specific PTSD symptom, the framework pulls the relevant info from the database about the questions, whether it's a main question or a follow-up, stuff like that.
And the dialogue acts we talked about, where do they fit in?
They're absolutely central. The system uses that DA schema to figure out what kind of response to generate next.
Okay.
So if it needs specific diagnostic info, it might use an information-seeking tag and grab the right question. But if the person just said something, it might use an acknowledgement or maybe empathy tag first before asking the next question.
So it's making these little decisions constantly.
All the time. How to keep the conversation flowing and gather the diagnostic data structurally. Then once it thinks it has enough on a symptom, it triggers the assess variable function. That's an automated pipeline that scores whether that PTSD criterion seems to be met based on the chat.
Okay, that paints a much clearer picture.
Yeah.
Now, obviously this is research, so evaluation is key. How did they figure out if Trust actually worked well?
They used a really thorough process. They had human experts involved, one with a linguistics background focused on the conversation itself, and a board-certified psychologist who specializes in PTSD.
2 different angles.
Exactly. These experts independently reviewed transcripts of interviews Trust conducted, and they compared these AI interviews to transcripts from real-life clinical interviews. They also, interestingly, had other LLMs evaluated, too.
So looking at how natural the conversation was and how clinically sound it was?
Precisely. They had specific metrics. For the Trust agent itself, they looked at comprehensiveness. Did it cover all the symptoms thoroughly? Yeah. Appropriateness, were its questions and responses clinically sound? And communication style, did it feel natural? And for the patient simulation part, they checked. Completeness, did the simulation match the original transcript content? Appropriateness, did it make sense in context? Faithfulness, did it stick to the original info without adding stuff? And communication style, again, did it sound like the original patient?
Got it. So what did they find? What were the main numbers, the quantitative results?
Well, the big takeaway was that, on average, the human experts found Trust's performance as an interviewer to be pretty much on par with the real-life clinical transcripts.
Wow. Okay, so comparable to average clinicians.
Which is significant, right?
Yeah.
Suggests that AI could actually handle this complex task reasonably well. But here's where it gets interesting.
Oh.
When they used other LLMs, like Claude and GPT, to evaluate trust, those AI models consistently rated trustees' performance as enhanced. They thought it was better than the real human interviews.
Huh. So the AI thought the AI was doing a better job than the humans did?
Basically, yeah. Which definitely raises a flag about, can we really rely only on AI to evaluate AI in these kinds of sensitive, nuanced situations? Probably not yet.
That's a fascinating discrepancy. What about the patient simulation part? How did that measure up?
The human experts rated the simulations as, well, acceptable overall, but they did find a key weakness, specifically in faithfulness, meaning the AI sometimes struggled to accurately capture all the important details from the original patient's words, and sometimes it hallucinated. It added information that just wasn't there in the original transcript.
Right, the hallucination issue again.
Yeah, and again, when they had Claude and GPT evaluate the simulations, the two LLMs disagreed significantly with each other, which again just reinforces that we really need human oversight for this kind of assessment.
So the AI interviewer did okay, comparable to humans on average. But getting an AI to simulate a patient faithfully, and even getting other AIs to agree on how well it did, that was trickier.
Definitely more challenging.
What else came out of the qualitative analysis? When the experts looked closely at the conversations, what specific issues did they see?
That qualitative part gave some really rich insights. For instance, the conversation expert and the clinical expert sometimes had different views on trustees' communication.
How so?
The conversation expert might see, say, an acknowledgement or an empathetic phrase as good for smoothing the conversation flow. But the clinical expert might feel it sometimes distracted from the main diagnostic goal, or maybe even slightly misinterpreted or embellished what the patient said.
Ah, so the AI tries to be conversational or empathetic, but maybe does it in a way that could subtly alter the clinical picture.
Potentially, yes, or lead the witness a tiny bit. Another issue was appropriateness. Sometimes trust asked clarifying questions that seemed conversationally logical but weren't actually needed for the diagnosis.
Like getting bogged down in details that weren't clinically relevant.
Exactly. There was an example where it asked for specifics about how a memory was impaired, when really the key diagnostic point was just that the memory impairment existed. They also noted that the AI's acknowledgments or validations could be a bit verbose, wordy, and it struggled to replicate really subtle human things, like a quick followed by a deliberate pause. Those nuances are hard.
Yeah, those tiny cues carry so much weight in a real conversation. Makes sense an AI would struggle there. What about the simulation problems they saw qualitatively?
Well, again, the main thing was that faithfulness issue hallucination. If the original transcript was a bit sparse on details, the AI might, well, fill in the blanks.
Making stuff up.
Yeah, like if a patient mentioned maybe 1 or 2 hobbies, the simulation might suddenly list 5 hobbies, adding ones that were never mentioned.
Yeah.
They also found something interesting about the original transcript quality. Sometimes if the original human interview was really thorough with lots of optional questions asked,
Yeah.
paradoxically, trust might score lower on comprehensiveness because it didn't ask all those optional extras. But that same detailed transcript gave the patient simulation more solid ground to be faithful.
Huh. So a more detailed original could make the AI interviewer look less thorough, but the AI simulator more accurate. That's kind of counterintuitive.
It really is. It just highlights how complex it is to try and replicate and evaluate these incredibly nuanced human interactions using AI. It's not straightforward.
Absolutely. So pulling all this together, what was the big overarching conclusion from the researchers about the trust system?
Well, their main conclusion was pretty positive, actually. They felt trust shows real potential as a tool to help make mental health care more available. It demonstrated it could conduct these PTSD diagnostic interviews with performance, comparable to average clinicians.
Okay.
And they really emphasized that the dialogue Act schema they built isn't just for PTSD. It could be a solid, adaptable framework for building similar AI tools for other conditions that use structured interviews.
Right. So for everyone listening, what are the key takeaways we should walk away with from this deep dive into trust?
Okay, first, I think it's clear AI is seriously being explored to tackle that big access problem in mental health care. Helping with formal diagnosis is a major focus.
And trust shows it's possible, right?
Yeah, it's a strong example that LLMs can handle complex tasks like a PTSD diagnostic interview, performing, on average, Similarly to human clinicians, that's a big deal.
And it feels like there's always a but. With AI, right now it's not perfect, not a replacement.
Absolutely crucial point. The research clearly shows limitations. Getting the conversational nuance right, avoiding those unnecessary questions, making sure the patient simulation is truly faithful without hallucinating. Those are real challenges.
And the evaluation itself is tricky.
Definitely. Relying only on other AIs to check the work. Probably not reliable enough yet for this kind of sensitive application. So continued work on structured systems like trust and on rigorous evaluation methods designed for clinical use, that's essential.
So promising, but lots of work still needed. It's a tool, not a magic bullet.
Exactly, a potentially powerful tool, but one that needs very careful development, testing, and refinement. Human oversight remains critical.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe something provocative for you, the listener, to chew on. As we consider bringing AI deeper into something as personal as mental health diagnosis, what safeguards, what level of human oversight should be absolutely non-negotiable? The promise of better access, lower cost, it's compelling. But what does comparable to average clinicians really mean in practice? And what are the risks, maybe ones we haven't even thought of yet, of relying heavily on AI in such a profoundly human and sensitive area?
Those are the really critical questions, aren't they? Moving beyond just can we do it to should we do it, and if so, how? It forces that deeper ethical and practical discussion.
Exactly. If this deep dive into trust and AI in mental health spark your interest, we definitely encourage you to look further. The researchers actually made their project open source.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, you can find the details and code on GitHub. The link is in our show notes, but it's github.com/sichung2/trsd.git. It's a great starting point to explore this really important, fast-moving field yourself.